I've always been a gamer.
Gamers, rise up!
But I really didn't get into gaming culture until the 7th generation of consoles. Of course, I owned and played games from previous generations like the GameCube and PlayStation 2, and games from that generation are still some of my favorite of all time, like Devil May Cry 3, Kingdom Hearts 2, and Mario Sunshine. But I didn't really see the culture around gaming until the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 generation, didn't really follow games coverage and games criticism. I also started to look at games differently starting from that generation. Really started to see games more as an art form similar to film, with games like Uncharted being more of like an action film, with extremely well acted out scenes and thought out set pieces, and Deadly Premonition, a valiant attempt to capture Lynchian storytelling in a console game. This was also the generation of mediocre brown and gray hallway shooters. The Medal of Honor reboot games are the first that come to mind when I think about those. A bunch of samey shooters lining the GameStop shelves with the same gunman looking straight at the camera. BioShock Infinite even fell into this trap, being market tested to hell so it has the same gunman shooter cover as every other game, all of them trying to grab the Call of Duty audience, I guess. And man, I'm so glad we moved past that culturally, right? Well, I recently started playing something that really recaptured that vibe from games from 2007, and that's the gray-brown Soviet robo extravaganza, Atomic Heart. Atomic Heart is a first-person shooter released in 2023 on the PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and PC. But it doesn't quite feel like something that came out this generation, if I'm honest. It's chock full of gray-brown corridors and has the most generic as hell looking box art that screams PlayStation 3 shooter that you definitely forgot. When you boot it up, it'll be more graphically impressive than something, say, like BioShock, but Atomic Heart spiritually belongs next to BioShock in your 360 library. This is normally where I like to dig into Atomic Heart's development. But back when it launched in 2023, the game was hit with a rather intense backlash. So I'm going to cover both the backlash and the game's development hand in hand, due to nature of some of the criticism and concerns people had when the game released. Atomic Heart was developed by a fledgling studio, Mundfish, a development team out of Cyprus, and according to the website has employees from many cultural backgrounds from Ukraine, Poland, and even Israel, or just the common nationalities of the island from the cursory Google search I did. A bulk of the backlash the game received had to do with the studio's relationship with Russia. Especially since at the time of the game's launch, there were a lot of eyes on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. While I try to refrain from getting too political in my videos, I am more than willing to take Russian bribes. And my rates are half of whatever Tim Pool takes.
Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy.
Come on, Vladdy Daddy, my Venmo is... Most of the ire the studio has received has been because the studio heads and producers do have some ties to Russian industry, and the fact that the studio didn't voice clear support for Ukraine after the Russian invasion. The CEO of Mundfish was a chief executive at Mail.ru, Russia's biggest emailing service, and one of the sources of the studio's income was Gazprom, a Russian state-owned gas company. The studio did also receive funding from a Cyprus-based investment firm, with that firm having ties to Russia as well. So there is a clear money trail from Russia. There are also some not so positive references to Ukraine in the game. The game does take place in an alternate universe, 1955 Soviet Union, and Ukraine was a Soviet state, and there's always seemed to be a bit of animosity between the two nations. At some point in the game, Ukrainians get called pigs by the main character, but that's something I don't recall seeing in my playthrough, but it could have been patched out at some point. Still, I find it cited in a few different articles. I personally didn't feel like it came across as anything more than good old-fashioned European racism. And the game was in development for many years before the invasion even started. So I don't necessarily see this as a full-throated endorsement of the invasion. But with the studio not full-throatedly disavowing the Russian invasion, or at least in a way that a lot of people online wanted it to be, the studio's official statement being, they are for peace and not a political tool of any nation. It does feel a bit of a half-assed response. But also someone who played the game, I don't feel like this game is a piece of propaganda or has anything in the game's text or subtext that screams as an endorsement of the invasion of Ukraine. I almost see this response as a kinda not trying to bite the hand that feeds it, with a good amount of money coming from Russia. And that's how I choose to see it, because I haven't found any smoking gun evidence that screams that this is Russian propaganda.
Gotcha.
Hello? Wait, you're saying Putin's checked in clear? God, I just recorded that entire segment. This game is just some Russo commie propaganda that should be burned at the stake at every Walmart in America. Another reason I believe the game didn't quite blow up like a lot of people expected, despite the hype over the 5 years between its earliest announcement and the game's release. It's because I feel like the earliest trailers sold a different experience than we ended up getting in the end. Those trailers gave a sort of dark, moody, Bioshock-esque experience. And the game we ended up getting, while having some influence from Bioshock still, was a lot more arcadey than those early trailers led everyone to believe. So when I ended up playing this game, I had to put all my expectations at the door, because I wanted to meet the game where it's at, on its own terms, and jump into whatever the experience was that the devs wanted to give the audience. And that experience is one that I thoroughly enjoyed. The game has an odd, disparate tone, both being very goofy, but also dark and serious, with the protag going,
"Crispy critters,"
every few lines, even with people being brutally murdered around him, as well as questioning the powers that be before ending up in a surreal, cartoony platformer level for 10 minutes. This disparate tone is something I really enjoy, getting the Major's goofy catchphrase and his bromance with his glove, while mostly running through muddy environments strewn with corpses. Atomic Heart follows Comrade Major Sergei Nechayev, aka P3, a special agent working directly under the scientist Dmitry Sechenov, the mind behind the Soviet polymerization projects, which are essentially Adam from Bioshock. Think of the polymer as a miracle goo that can hold data, give you powers, or even just swim in, as well as Collective, in the launch of the new Collective 2.0. Collective being this kind of automation project, and Collective 2.0 on its face will allow people to use a thought device to control the Soviet robots. The Soviets in this timeline essentially cornering the market on cheap labor through their automation, even crippling the United States economy with its cheap labor. P3 is equipped with Sechenov's pet project, a polymerized glove called Charles, or just Charles, I guess. P3 also has a bad case of amnesia after a military operation where he got critically injured, but Sechenov built him back better.
Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology.
Now, P3 has been Sechenov's personal military operative ever since entering Sechenov's care. P3 and Charles get sent to Facility 3826 to prep for the launch of Collective 2.0. But once P3 gets to the facility, shenanigans are underway. All the nice, safe, almost cute Soviet robots that you've seen up to this point have now gone berserk and have started attacking the population of the facility. Now Charles and P3 need to get to the bottom of whoever's behind this disaster. All signs are pointing to Petrov, the lead engineer in charge of the Soviet robots. Early on, we find one of the coolest characters in the entire game, Granny Zina, the ideal babushka. With an AK and an RPG, she's gunning down these damn robots and saves P3's ass. She ends up tossing both P3 and Charles into one of the facility's many underground labs. And now, here's where the game really starts. Close to 45 minutes in, you find yourself a gun, get tutorialized in some of the basic lock puzzles, and get introduced to the slick looting system where you vacuum up all the goodies by waving your hand like a Soviet Harry Potter. And while you're getting your bearings through the facility, a giant excavator robot busts through like the Kool-Aid Man.
Oh yeah!
He gets knocked out and nursed back to health by Dr. Larissa Filatova. She seems to be running some sort of triage in the facility, where she's patching up as many survivors as she can find. But lo and behold, she and Petrov are dirty lovers in the nighttime. And before you can question Filatova, a robot looking like one of my old managers busts into the room, giving Filatova time to escape and you a mini-boss to fight. While continuing through the lab, you do eventually run into Petrov, and when you get close to cornering him, we find a headless body. We call Sechenov to update him, and he asks to grab Petrov's head and his golden rings, which neither are on the corpse. Then get ordered to meet up with Sechenov's right-hand man, a former former Nazi scientist by the name of Stockhausen, deeper into the facility. Here's where the game starts to open up and you get to see its open world mechanics, as well as the side content, aka the testing grounds. But I'll get more into that later. Now you have to go through the whole facility to hunt down Petrov, who yes, is still alive, and Larissa Filatova. I would say all the story areas work as really highly designed dungeons, filled with puzzles and combat arenas throughout. You go through museums dedicated to Soviet achievements, a robot-centric theater/brothel for all the dirty robosexuals out there. I mean, can you blame them when you got robots looking like this? And even go through secret labs doing grotesque human experiments. Spoilers for the rest of the game's story from this point on. There should be a time code on screen and one in the description to tell you where to jump to. You chase Petrov throughout the facility and you corner him in the robot theater, which is both teeming with robots and mutants alike. The mutants being this kind of headcrab zombie-esque creatures, but honestly they kind of fall on the back burner as the story goes. And once you corner Petrov, he, But as you remember, Sechenov just wanted his head and rings delivered. The rings actually being these sort of beta connectors that allow someone to essentially have ruling power over collective. We give the head to Stockhausen by cutting through a secret lab under the hospital in the facility, where you find some horrible and grotesque human experiments going on. You finally make it to the German after fighting through multiple boss enemies. You give him his head, but before you can leave, oh no, oh no, oh no.
Oh yeah!
The Kool-Aid Man attacks. But later on, he gets called the Jelly Man by Charles. I personally prefer Kool-Aid over Jello, but that's just me. The Jelly Man absorbs the totally trustworthy German and severed head. When we come to, we get a call from Dr. Filatova to meet her at the lighthouse.
There's always a lighthouse.
But on your way to said lighthouse, you toss the rings because
no one man should have all that power.
Psst, him tossing those rings will become very important later. Here in the secret lab under the lighthouse is where we find the dark secrets behind Collective 2.0 and the polymerization of the Soviet populace. We find that this polymerization transports the human consciousness into a realm called Limbo, a realm that P3 has dipped into a couple times throughout the game. These people are able to be commanded like robots. We also learn a lot about P3's past while going through the lab. We learn about the mission that went south that caused his amnesia. The same mission that caused his terrible amnesia also claimed the life of his wife, who was also a soldier in his Special Forces unit. While P3 was in bad shape, he was able to be put together with high-end prosthetics, while also getting a brain implant that altered his memories, erasing any memory he had of his wife, and also altering how his mind interacts with the realm of Limbo. And what was left of his wife's brain and personality was uploaded to Sechenov's sexy robot bodyguards. We also learned that our glove, Charles, is the polymerized consciousness of Charlton Zaharov, Sechenov's partner in the original polymerization project, and one of the Soviet Union's brightest minds. Now, it's off to get answers from Sechenov. But on our way, we black out, enter Limbo once again, and once we come to, we find ourselves in front of Granny Zena's hut. While we were in Limbo, our body killed Filatova. Granny Zena ends up being the mother of your wife. She pushes you to confront Sechenov, and here's where the timeline splits. You get the first and really only decision that affects how the game ends, where you can either choose to confront Sechenov, storming his base of operations, fight the twins, and learn the dark secrets of the Atomic Heart Project, which has been alluded to throughout the game, but never really given much detail until the end. The Atomic Heart Project was a plan to infiltrate enemy nations using Soviet robots. While you're playing through the game, you might have thought, wow, all these civilian robots have a lot more combat functionality than one might assume. And that's because every Soviet robot had a kill switch deep within its programming. And once enemy nations hit critical mass of Soviet automatons, the robots would take over the nuclear power plants of the United States, UK, or any other nation the Soviet Union saw as an enemy, cutting off the power from those countries' atomic heart, Or you can make the decision to walk away, where P3 rips out the polymerized goo in his glove and decides to drink at a hotel somewhere else while Collective 2.0 launches. But if you choose to confront Sechenov, you learn that he never really intended to use Limbo, or how Collective affects the human conscious beyond making robots easier to command. He never was behind any time you entered Limbo or assisted in killing any of his adversaries, like Molotov, Filatova, or when the Jelly Man killed Stockhausen. That all ended up being Charles' doing. His goal was to kill Sechenov and take control of the Jelly Man, aiming to stop all human progress and therefore human evolution. And then this ending concludes with P3 entering Limbo and getting embraced by one of the robot twins, symbolizing his dead wife. The end? Right? Wrong. The DLC so far follows these two disparate continuities. In the first DLC, Annihilation Instinct, we follow P3 in the post-Collective 2.0 world. He's drinking his sorrows away in a bar on the other side of the Soviet Union, but with his bad luck, it ends up being pretty close to the facility of the Nora AI system. Nora is a weapons cabinet that you use to craft your weapons and upgrades throughout the game. When you meet her in the base game, she's violent and very horny.
Got a sword? A massive sword? Thrust it deep into my socket so I can do so much more.
Killing any person she sees as lesser or interferes with her one true love, which ends up being the player. But her AI being damaged after Petrov hacked all the non-hostile robots in the main game. So even though everything ended up going back to normal after the main game, Nora's AI was permanently damaged and remains aggressive. Nora is in fight for control over the facility she's in with Granny Xena. We end up teaming up with another Soviet doctor, Lebdev, to repair Nora, as well as getting that babushka off our lawn. There is a point where we have a confrontation with Sechenev over the phone, being used as a brainwash tool, as well as confronting him about what he did with his wife, right before your final confrontation with Nora, where he promises to give you all the files and everything he had on both you and your wife, as his thank you for everything he's done for him. To repair Nora, you go through the facility, collect these little robots called beads that you use to reset her AI. And in the final confrontation, you fight Nora and her robo-beads, assisted by the twins, aka what's left of your wife. Then, you go on indefinite leave, likely concluding this timeline. Then, Trapped in Limbo follows P3 in Limbo after he gets gooped with Sechenov. P3 wakes up in this surreal world guided by the teardrop, aka the polymerized mind of his dead wife. She guides you through Limbo in hopes of getting you out, and you bringing her along with you. She's essentially been spending time as a in-limbo operative for Sechenov. But after 3 years of being a disembodied consciousness in Limbo, she wants out, and the only way she can get out is if you find those beta connectors you yeeted at the end of the game. The DLC ending with P3 leaving Limbo, taking one of the twins in his arms on his quest to find the rings. This slim-thick robot likely going to be the house for his wife's consciousness. The third DLC, Moray, is slated for 2025, and from the look of the teaser trailer, I assume it's following the Limbo continuity. Being in an underwater lab, I assume it's the lab under the lighthouse where you threw the rings, but not much has been shown or said about this DLC. P.S. The day I'm recording this, a new trailer for the third DLC came out, renaming it Enchantment Under the Sea, with some gameplay footage. The current release date is slated for January 25th, 2025. At least at the time of me writing. Overall, I rather enjoyed the story of the game. I mean, the narrative itself isn't groundbreaking by any means, but it's fun. The setting is weird and has a lot of intrigue. I mentioned its odd, disparate tone earlier, but I really liked its critiques of the Soviet Union and the Marxist society striving for equality, but often being led by the most power-hungry people. And while characters like Sechenov felt like they had a timer floating over their head, counting down to when he's going to become the real antagonist, the game was fun and had some twists that kept me interested throughout. And honestly, I'm excited to boot this game back up when those last 2 DLCs come out, just to see the conclusion of this story. The gameplay of Atomic Heart is oh so smooth. Everything feels really good. The guns have the right amount of oomph. The melee combat is actually pretty good considering it's a first-person shooter. It has the right amount of impact and rarely feels that floaty like most first-person melee combat does. One thing that took me by surprise was how much the game focused on its crafting system. As I mentioned earlier in the video, the looting mechanics are really quick and easy to use, vacuuming up various materials from your environment as well as off of dead enemies that you use for crafting. Of course, like most crafting mechanics, you need to find schematics to craft your damage dealing tools, and most of the base weapons can be found along the critical path, but nearly all the upgrades and modifications are found within the game's testing grounds. The testing grounds are underground facilities dotted throughout the map, and they work as kind of mini dungeons, with a mix of puzzles and combat arenas. The basic layout of the testing ground goes like this. The first room works as a big puzzle room, each testing ground focusing on different types of puzzles and puzzle mechanics. Then you get your bronze chest for completing the first room. Then the second room is a combat arena, and once you shoot everything dead, you get your silver chest, with 2 blueprints usually. Then you get one last ultra difficult puzzle room, getting the gold chest and finishing the testing ground. These testing grounds are completely optional, but you'll be missing out on all the modifications and upgrades for all your weapons. These mods do things like giving you passive bonuses on different enemy types, reduce recoil, or add the ability to build energy for your energy weapons when you land hits with your other weapons, as well as giving you special moves for your melee weapons. I spent hours and hours searching for and scrounging through these testing grounds. Honestly, the puzzles range in quality and difficulty. Some of the testing grounds I got towards the middle of the game I thought were a lot harder and not as well thought out as some of the ones that I found even later in the game. But overall, I really liked it. Getting these portal-like puzzle rooms throughout the game really changed up the pacing for me, and at times almost felt like playing a different game within this game. There is just a bit of ludonarrative dissonance that I couldn't help but notice. When the story's yelling at you to hunt down Petrov, he's getting away, time is of the essence. But I spent hours looking for and going through 3 other testing grounds to get the upgrades I wanted. The crafting tools are also really nice. You get all your materials, spend them to get different mods, but if you want to dismantle something and try something else out, you get everything back that you've put into that mod. Like if you made an electromagnetic barrel for the robots, but now you're stuck fighting nothing but mutants, you can swap out to the anti-organic barrel and put all the materials you put into the electromagnetic one back, really letting you experiment. The open world of Atomic Heart has a sort of alarm system. There are cameras dotted throughout, and if you stand in front of one too long, an alarm will be raised and all the robots in the area will try to attack you. But if you attack a robot while being filmed, or just sit too long in a camera's line of sight, it'll go into a level 2 alarm, which will start to drop in robots from other areas, like the Fortnite battle bus, making it more difficult to go through any zone. And any robots you do destroy, or any cameras, do get rebuilt by these little flying guys that show up and repair anything you break. One other upgrade that I have yet to mention is your personal upgrades. When you're at a Nora cabinet to upgrade your weapons, you can also customize Charles, or your own personal abilities, which gives you polymer abilities like throwing lightning bolts, ice, using mass telekinesis, or just spraying goo that boosts all elemental effects. By upgrading Charles, you can also upgrade P3's personal stats like your health, your reload speed, and giving you invincibility frames while dodging. My biggest complaint is how tiny the little icons are for your polymer abilities. I can never tell which one I have equipped because they're so tiny and all kind of look alike when you're sitting far away from your screen. There's so many times where I accidentally sprayed goo everywhere when I was trying to use mass telekinesis, or vice versa. And now let's get to the gameplay changes from the DLC. Annihilation Instinct is a little bit of a weird one. You keep all of your health and stat upgrades from the base game, but most of your weapons remain unavailable, and the few that you do get seem very curated for this DLC, where you can't even swap out different barrel types or do a lot of the customization you could in the base game. Guns like the Kalash and Fat Boy are nowhere to be seen, and most of the abilities for your polymer glove are also unavailable. You do get one new ability to slow down time, and the other ability they give you is the polymer shield that I rarely used in the base game. But they do give you 2 new weapons, a spear and a LMG mixed with the line cutter from Dead Space. But you're pretty much getting what you're used to from the base game in this DLC. Puzzles, combat arenas, but Trapped in Limbo takes a weird turn with its gameplay. The few times in the base game you enter Limbo, it's a sort of cartoony, surreal, platforming detour, with apples working as coins or a basic collectible. But the part of Limbo we inhabit for this DLC does have a strong emphasis on platforming, but the type of platforming it wants to do is the slide surfing from custom Counter-Strike maps. And personally, I wasn't a big fan of it. While I've been on board for all of the odd little puzzle diversions and the light Uncharted-esque climbing sections and platforming, I think this new gameplay addition was...
It's not good.
I honestly hated the slide surfing section so much that I almost tapped out of this and looked up the ending on YouTube. Once you get past the opening section, you get a world select like a typical platformer, and I thought I had to clear all of it to get to the ending. So I ended up spending well over an hour in the second slide surfing area, while being stuck about halfway through, and wanting to throw in the towel severely. Eventually I backed out of that and went for the other open option in the world select. And that zone ended up being more of a straightforward platforming style level with breaks for combat, and I found that section actually pretty fun. And when you finish that, the finale zone opens up, and that last zone goes into a weird direction. This zone is a Goose Subway Surfers knockoff, and it's a goose because for some reason geese are the visual embodiment of P3's fears. I don't hate it. The final boss of this DLC is an army of angry geese in the same part of Limbo that you went through in the base game, finally making it to the bottom layer. I know this game got a lot of comparisons to the BioShock franchise, especially with its earliest trailers, but I don't think it's close to the original BioShock at all. If anything, it's closest to BioShock Infinite, being a lot more action focused and a lot of the RPG elements taking a back seat. But like I said, this game also has a lot of influence from Portal and platforming similar to Uncharted, and then gluing it all together with a weird open world design, as well as having these more tightly designed dungeons with a lot of puzzles and combat throughout. This feeling a lot more than just some BioShock ripoff. Though a lot of its parts aren't the most unique, the way that they all kind of get glued together feel like a collage of sorts. Almost like a Tarantino film in some ways, where no singular part of it is unique, but the way it all comes together feels wholly unique to itself. While far from a perfect game, Atomic Heart made me feel the same way I did when I first got into gaming during that 7th generation. I found a dev team reaching for the stars with a bunch of odd ideas, and really made an artistic statement, even if parts of this game are uneven to say the least. While it did revel in a lot of samey brown and gray corridors, and had some of the worst box art I've seen in a very long time, this game is an odd bright spot, chock full of heart. Atomic Heart, that is.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
This is a game that took a lot of big swings, and landed more than it missed. And this is definitely something I would recommend to anyone that watches this channel, because if you have a refined enough taste to find me, you'll probably dig this game. And if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I always appreciate it when someone finishes one of these videos. And I want to give a special thanks to the talented Teddy Scott for donating a couple in this video. And normally here's where I'd say some vague statement about I'll hopefully be uploading more regularly, but I wouldn't count on that anytime soon. But I have been working on some new projects for the new year. So if you'd like to see those, why not hit like, subscribe, maybe the bell icon so you get notified when I post a new video. Thank you again for watching, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next one.